The first time I saw the burning handprint, I thought it was just my imagination. Exhaustion plays tricks on the mind, especially after a brutal shift like that night. But as I stood there staring at my own bedroom wall, the dark imprint of a hand, scorched into the paint, refused to disappear. My gut twisted. I had seen that mark before. It started with a fire, like so many before it. A 3-story house engulfed in flames, its orange glow visible for miles. The air was thick with the scent of burning wood and something acrid, something that made my skin prickle. We arrived in minutes, sirens cutting through the night, tires screeching to a stop in front of the inferno. The house was supposed to be empty. That's what the neighbor said. But the screams from inside told a different story. My captain, Davis, barked orders as we pulled our gear on. I was the first through the door, axe in hand, feeling the rush of heat against my turnout gear. Visibility was low. Thick black smoke rolled like a living thing, curling around the staircase and swallowing the walls. My radio crackled. "Sanders, do you see anyone?" I didn't answer. I was frozen. In the flickering glow of the fire, there was something on the far wall, just beyond the flames. A handprint, burned deep into the wallpaper, the edges still smoldering. But there was no fire source near it. I blinked, took a step closer. Then the ceiling above me groaned. "Move, move!" Davis shouted. I barely dove out of the way before a beam collapsed where I had just stood. The moment was gone. Shaking it off, I pressed forward, reaching the second floor, where the cries for help had come from. But the room was empty. No victims, no movement. Just fire eating away at the walls, crackling like laughter. I swept the area twice before my radio crackled again. "Sanders, we're pulling out. The structure's about to go." Reluctantly, I turned back. As I descended the stairs, I saw it again. The same handprint, this time on the wooden banister. I ran my gloved hand over it, but the charred mark didn't smudge. It was burned in deep. That fire should have been like any other. A house reduced to embers. A job completed. But when I got home, weary and reeking of smoke, I saw it waiting for me. The same burning handprint. On my bedroom wall. I didn't sleep that night. The handprint on my wall was identical to the ones in the fire. I ran my fingers over the mark, still warm. My pulse pounded. Fires don't follow people home. This was impossible. I scrubbed at the mark, but it wouldn't fade. My phone vibrated. "You okay?" "Davis." I hesitated, then typed back, "Yeah, just tired." I couldn't explain it. I wasn't even sure I believed it myself. Morning came, but the unease lingered. At the station, the guys joked. Business as usual. But as I reached my locker, my breath caught. Another handprint, this time inside my locker. The metal was seared black. A chill crept up my spine. This fire hadn't been normal, and whatever was in it hadn't stayed behind. I forced myself to shake it off, but unease settled deep in my bones. I went about my duties, checking equipment, reviewing reports, but my focus wavered. At lunch, I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something lurking just beyond my sight. Then during the evening drill, I felt it, a blast of heat against my back. I spun around expecting to see open flames. Nothing. Just the station, normal as ever. But the warmth lingered, clinging to my skin like breath on a cold night. That night, I hesitated before stepping into my apartment. My fingers hovered over the doorknob, a nagging feeling in my gut. When I finally turned it and stepped inside, the air was thick, stifling. Then I saw them, handprints, scorched into my walls, my ceiling, my furniture. Dozens of them, and they were fresh. I backed toward the door, my heart hammering. The air shimmered with heat, though there were no flames. The scent of smoke filled my lungs, thick and suffocating. My hands shook as I reached for my phone. Before I could dial, a whisper scraped against my ears. A voice, low, crackling like embers. "Help me!" I froze. The sound wasn't coming from my phone. It was coming from the walls. The handprints darkened, the edges smoldering as if they had just been branded into the surface. The whisper came again, urgent, desperate. Help me! I swallowed hard and forced my feet to move. I turned on every light, checking each room, but I was alone. The temperature in my apartment continued to climb. My skin prickled, sweat beating at my temples. Then, my bedroom door slammed shut. I jumped back, pulse pounding in my ears. Cautiously, I reached for the handle. The metal was scorching hot. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I gritted my teeth and pushed through. The room was empty, except for the mirror. A single word had appeared on the glass, written in soot. Trapped. My mouth went dry. I staggered back, knocking over a chair. The whisper returned, growing louder. The room grew unbearably hot, the air swirling with the scent of burned wood. I couldn't stay here. I bolted out of the apartment, gasping for air as I reached the street below. The city was calm, normal, but I wasn't. My mind raced, my breath uneven. If something had followed me from that fire, it wasn't done with me yet. I didn't tell anyone about the handprints, not Davis, not the guys at the station. I couldn't. How do you explain something like this? I was supposed to be the tough firefighter, the one who handles everything without flinching. But now I wasn't even sure I could face the fire anymore. The next day, I found myself at the station earlier than usual, the unease from the previous night still weighing on my chest. The heat in my apartment had been unbearable, and the whispers had refused to let me sleep. I kept hearing that voice, "Help me," in the back of my mind like an ember that wouldn't burn out. "Sanders, you good?" Davis asked, his eyes sharp as he walked past me in the locker room. His tone was casual, but there was a hint of concern beneath it. "Yeah," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just didn't sleep much last night." He nodded, clearly not buying it, but he didn't press. The morning passed slowly, the routine feeling strangely hollow. My thoughts kept drifting back to the apartment, to the suffocating heat in the handprints. It was like the fire had left something behind, something that had latched on to me. At lunch, I found myself picking at my food, unable to focus on anything. The air around me felt heavier than usual, thick with an oppressive heat. I was sweating more than I should have been, even with the AC running full blast. My skin tingled, as though I was standing too close to a fire. "Hey, you okay?" one of the other guys Keller asked. He was younger than me, still new to the team, but his concern was genuine. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I gave him a tight smile. "Just tired, man. Long shift yesterday." The clock on the wall ticked steadily, its rhythm dragging me toward the afternoon. But something was wrong. The building felt wrong, like the temperature was rising without explanation. Sweat clung to my clothes and the heat seemed to press in from all sides. And then it came again. The whisper, a faint sound, barely audible over the hum of the station. "Help me!" I froze. The other guys were talking, oblivious, but I could hear it, clear as day. My heart raced. The fire was calling me, not just in my head, but here, in the station. I stood up abruptly, knocking my chair over. "Excuse me," I muttered too quickly, and bolted for the door. Outside, the air felt cooler, but the buzzing in my ears didn't stop. The whisper was growing louder, like it was following me. My hands were shaking, my breath shallow, as I paced in the parking lot. And then, as if in answer to my panic, I saw it. The handprint. It was burned into the hood of my truck. The same mark. The same seared edges. I couldn't breathe. My legs buckled beneath me, and I sank to the ground. I ran my fingers over the mark, feeling the heat radiating off it. It shouldn't have been there. I should have been able to explain it away. But it was real, and it was coming for me. The whispers started again, louder this time. "Help me!" It wasn't a plea anymore. It was a demand. I jumped up, my heart hammering in my chest. The fire wasn't over. It had followed me. And if I didn't do something, it would consume me. I had to go back. I had to find out what it wanted and why it wouldn't let me go. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being pulled back to the fire. Not in the way you'd expect. Not with any kind of rational thought or understanding. It wasn't a choice. It was a need, something deep inside me urging me to confront whatever had been following me. I called in sick that night. I couldn't risk bringing whatever this was into the station. They'd think I was losing it. Hell, I thought I was losing it. But it was real. The handprints, the heat, the whispers. I couldn't pretend it wasn't happening anymore. I drove to the site of the fire. The house had been reduced to a smoldering pile of rubble, charred wood and ash scattered across the yard. The street was eerily quiet, as if the flames had swallowed all the noise. There was no sign of life left. No neighbors, no investigators, just me and the ruins. I stepped out of my truck, the crunch of gravel beneath my boots loud in the stillness. The air was unnervingly calm, but there was something in it, a heaviness, like the atmosphere was waiting for something to happen. The wind picked up, and for the first time I felt it. The heat. It wasn't like the normal heat of a fire. It wasn't the kind that licked at your skin or made you sweat from the exertion of your gear. This heat was different. It was a smothering warmth that made it feel like I was standing too close to an open flame, even though I wasn't. I walked toward the charred remains of the front door, where I'd first seen the handprint. The area was still hot to the touch, the heat radiating from the ground beneath my feet. But there was something else, something more than just the fire. A voice, not a whisper this time, a full-blown scream. It echoed in my ears, shaking me to the core. "Help me, please!" I froze, my body going rigid. The voice was unmistakable, the same one I'd heard in the apartment. It was coming from the rubble. I couldn't tell where it was coming from exactly. Just that it was everywhere, reverberating off the walls of the house like it was trapped within them. I kneeled, my hands trembling as I sifted through the ash, desperate to find the source of the voice. It was coming from the foundation, where the walls had crumbled and the floor had given way. I pulled away a piece of scorched timber, but then, there it was, a handprint, burned into the charred floorboards just like the others. But this time, it was bigger. It was different. The edges were sharper, more defined, as though it had been made by something human, something that had been there. I leaned closer, the heat from the print searing my skin, and that's when I saw it, the faint outline of a figure, burned into the wall behind it. A face. It was distorted, like it was caught in the flames, the features twisted by agony. The eyes were wide, mouth open in a silent scream, and the skin had melted away, leaving only the charred remains of a face trapped in the wall. I recoiled, my heart slamming against my ribs. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just the fire. It was something worse. "Help me!" The voice returned, weaker now. "Please, before it's too late." I had to get out of there. My instincts screamed at me to leave, to run far and fast, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the figure in the wall. The handprint was no longer the only thing left behind by the fire. Something had been trapped here, and if I didn't do something, it was going to drag me down with it. I turned to leave, but as I did, something caught my eye. A piece of paper, half burned, fluttering in the wind. I bent down and picked it up, my hands shaking as I unfolded it. A name. It was barely legible, scorched at the edges, but I could make out the letters. Emily. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't know anyone by that name, but I felt it. It was the key. Whatever this was, whatever had been left behind by that fire, it had something to do with her. And now I had to find out who she was. The name Emily clung to me like smoke in my lungs, suffocating and impossible to shake. It wasn't just a name, it was a clue, a key to something darker, something deeper than the fire itself. Whoever Emily was, she had been tied to that blaze, and now somehow she was tied to me. I had to find her. I had to understand what she wanted. I spent the next few days digging through anything I could find. Local news archives, police reports, fire department records. Emily was a common name, but there was something about the way it lingered in my mind that told me this wasn't a coincidence. It was connected to the house, to the fire, to the handprints. And then I found it, in an old news clipping, buried in the back of a fire investigation report. There was a mention of the house, the same 3-story home, destroyed in the blaze. But this time, there was something new. Emily Hayes, a name I had missed before. She wasn't just a victim of the fire. She was the one who had lived there. She had been trapped inside, and from the looks of it, she had never made it out. The report was vague. No one knew exactly how Emily had died. The fire had claimed so much of the house, and by the time the crew arrived, the flames had already consumed everything. But there was something about the way the fire had burned, the way it had been so intense that the investigators couldn't explain. It was as if the house itself had been alive, a thing consumed by rage. I was on the verge of piecing everything together when I received the call. It was Davis. "Sanders, we need you," he said, his voice grave. "We've got another fire." I felt my blood run cold. My heart started to pound as I grabbed my gear, throwing it into the truck. My mind raced with the thought that whatever was happening, whatever had followed me, wasn't done. It had only just begun. When we arrived at the new fire site, I could feel it immediately. The air was thick, heavier than usual, as if the weight of the fire had pressed down on everything in its path. This wasn't a normal blaze. There was something off about it. The fire was burning too hot. It felt like the same heat I had experienced in the station, in my apartment, on my truck. We moved fast, clearing the building and checking for victims. I worked quickly, my movements automatic, my focus sharpened. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the feeling that the fire was watching me. That's when I saw it, a handprint, burned into the wall, the same one. I froze. I felt the heat radiating off it. But it wasn't just the fire. It was something else, something familiar. The walls seemed to close in around me as I walked toward the mark. And then, just like before, the voice came. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a scream, a cry for help that echoed through the room, reverberating off the walls like it was coming from all around me. "Help me!" I stumbled back, my mind racing. I could feel the fire inside me, its heat rising, pushing against my chest. I knew what had to be done. I had to stop it, once and for all. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the piece of paper, the one with Emily's name scrawled on it. My fingers shook as I held it up to the flame. And then I did it. I set the paper on fire. The flames consumed it in an instant, and as they did, I felt the heat around me shift. The air grew colder, the oppressive weight lifting for the first time since this nightmare began. The handprint on the wall began to fade, the smoldering edges pulling back into the surface of the wood like a fading memory. And then, silence. It was over. The fire, the heat, the voice, gone. I didn't understand it. I didn't understand why Emily had been trapped or why the fire had come after me. But in that moment, I realized that sometimes fires burn more than just buildings. Sometimes they burn memories. They burn souls. And some fires never really go out. Thanks for watching Brave Sparks. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us bring you more powerful and inspiring stories. Stay brave, and we'll see you in the next one.